Tonight we have a fantastic panel of designers. They are probably among the best of their generation. I will introduce them one by one, and then we're going to go straight into questions. We will leave probably 10 minutes towards the end for questions from you. From the back.
Oh, hi. I'm Jaya Miceli, and I'm the art director for Scribner. It's the imprint of Simon & Schuster, and I worked for Penguin for 14 years. It's where I started in publishing, and it's where I got my start, and I worked for Paul Buckley. And
one note about Jaya, in the past few years, her covers have become ubiquitous. She has worked with many, many authors, and you probably will recognize them if we pointed to them. Peter, do you want me to introduce you, or do you want?
I can do it. You can do it however you want. I guess I'll do it. Also, just thanks to Fabrizio and Roberto for putting this beautiful thing together. I mean, hat tip. My name is Peter Mendelsund, and I'm an alcoholic. And I used to be a cover designer. For 15 years, I worked at Knopf. I see many familiar faces from Knopf here. Hi, guys. Now I'm a freelance designer and writer. I have a novel coming out this year, and Oliver and I are both working on redesigning the Atlantic magazine right now, and doing sort of a strange constellation of freelance design jobs, prose writing, and gadflying. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
You actually forgot to say that in his bio that Peter has worked as a dishwasher, bookstore clerk, a classical pianist, and an art director.
That is correct.
Hi, I'm Oliver. I am also a freelance designer, and I worked at Knopf for a few years before going freelance. That's my spiel.
Oliver has a beautiful monograph out from Rizzoli, which is you guys can.
No, he's going to say it.
No, that's it. Oliver has an absolutely gorgeous monograph out from Rizzoli, which you can buy at the front of the store, which is beautiful and contains both his book work as well as his editorial illustration. And it's called Don't Sleep.
And the price is?
I want my 15%.
This introduction, we've got this down. My name is Helen Yentus. I am the art director of Riverhead Books, so I still work at Penguin Random House, and started out in the Penguin art group, also under Paul Buckley, about 16 years ago. Worked at Random House for a while, and then came back to Penguin to work at Riverhead, and now those two companies are one company, so I've been here for 16 years.
She has been named one of Prince Magazine 20 under 30, and has
not anymore.
Not anymore. and has received an Art Directors Club Silver Award of Art and Craft in Advertising and Design. Thank you for coming.
Okay, let's start with the first question. First of all, sorry for my bad English. I'm Italian, so please be kind with me. So the first question is probably the most obvious one. Is do you ever buy a book by its cover?
I usually get them for free from my art director friends. But yes, sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah, occasionally. Less and less, I don't know.
I tend to read very few sort of first-run trade-published books these days. Now that I don't have to read for a living, I can read whatever I want. So I've been gravitating towards sort of older books that I never got to. And in that case, you have this huge ecosystem of covers to choose from on Abe Books or whatever it is, used bookstores, places like this. And definitely, I mean, if I'm choosing between 20 versions of Moby Dick, and there's nothing else to distinguish them, then yeah, sure. I'll even physically tear off the covers of books that I love, the covers of which I hate, just so that I can have them in my house and be able to abide them. So it's shallow, but yes is the answer.
So you strip the jacket.
Yes.
I would have to say yes. I'm being a book jacket designer. I'm attracted to the covers of books, as I have been from when I was a child. So, yes.
So apart from Peter, what is the impulse that drives you into choosing that book cover? Like professional curiosity, desire to own, or surprise? What else?
The actual coming up with the design.
Yeah, I mean,
like
the reason why you choose that cover.
Oh, I think it's just for the aesthetic reason. I just, if we, the title and the artwork, how it combines and how it relates to one another, and if it's aesthetically beautiful, it's something I would want to own and pick up.
I mean, I think especially when you're talking about a book that you might eventually really care about,
Right.
the cover indelibly affects the reading experience. I mean, it colors it one way or another, right? I mean, I'm wondering if my co-panelists have ever had the feeling of reading a book that they suspected their experience of reading it was skewed by the fact that they didn't like the cover, because it does inflect, actually, I think, the way you read a book, whether you're aware of it or not.
I think that's really interesting, and the thing I think about a lot is I read most books, because I do read for a living, I read them without covers. So I tend to get a manuscript from the editor and then actually print it out, book size, bound with just a paper cover. And it's a really different experience reading a book with no cover. It's not that you ripped off the cover that existed, there is no visual attached to it, versus reading a book that has a face. And I think it's difficult to separate the two.
Do you go back? I'm sorry to
No.
Shanghai you, but do you ever go back then after you've
reread?
designed the cover and the book has been printed, it's been published, and go back and reread it and see how the experience has changed?
I find it really hard to, because there's no time to read for pleasure outside of the books. But I mean, I think like one book I've been rereading is Lauren Groff's Florida, which just came out. I think it's come out. Having read that without a cover, that's a different experience, because you're also stressed out. Like, you're reading for content. I'm stressed out. Maybe you guys aren't stressed out when you're reading.
I'm definitely stressed
No,
out.
we're all stressed out.
I panic before I design a cover, or I'm given
Right.
an assignment.
Like, I've been reading The Left Hand of Darkness recently, and it's like I'm reading it and I'm like designing it in my head, and then I keep remembering like, oh no, it has a cover. I have nothing to do. This is just for pleasure, and I don't like it. I don't like the cover, but
Actually, just what you just said, designing in your head. I mean, we had a question about reading and design, and obviously it's also a question that's been asked to all book cover designers. Do you read the book that you?
that's always the first question.
That's always the
Yeah.
first question. So I assume you will have an answer, but I want to actually package it with another question. When do you know that you have what you need from that book? At what point of the reading of the book you actually know that you've captured the idea, or it's somehow revealed to you?
Like
Never.
never.
Okay.
So I make sketches. Sorry to just, I don't know why I think you're asking me personally. I'm sitting next.
No,
This is
no.
the problem with me sitting next to you. So I sketch in the margins, or I write down words and like hope there's something there, and then after I finish, I go back through and look at those stupid sketches, bad ideas, words that aren't helpful. So yeah, never. I mean, and I think other people design differently, but I just always assume whatever I've thought up in my head is not going to work when I get down to actually doing it. So you need to reserve space, especially if you've decided it is going to work. Then it's definitely not going to work. Okay. At least for me. But I bet you guys. I don't know.
I mean, the reading experience of working on sort of contemporary fiction as opposed to reading for pleasure and reading the classics is totally, I mean, they couldn't be more different. And when you impose this pressure on yourself to find something in the text. And I find that I had an experience reading The Underground Railroad when it was in manuscript form, and it was like, they presented it as this big book, one of the biggest books they'd published that year, and I read it and I was like, this is very good, but it was like a quick read. I was trying to be as diligent as possible, and I felt that I had gotten enough from it, and did the cover, and then I went back and read it when it was in ARC format, which it feels more real. It's like in between the manuscript and the actual printed book, and it was like, I was relieved of that burden, and it was a completely different experience. Also because reading a book for the second time, it's obviously, it's a different and more rich experience for the most part, but there were things that I had missed, I think because I was reading with such speed and like with a task at hand, which I don't enjoy doing, and it is such a relief to not have to do that as much anymore. Yeah.
Oh, for me, when I'm reading, I do somewhat similar with like that Helen does. I underline, and I will. I try to tap into like a feeling or a mood, or but that comes like at the end, like when I'm done and I'm like put the book down, and I try to like go with some sort of feeling, and generally my sketches never really work out. So it's like a trial and error. It's just I just start working, and as I work and as I start like designing and moving things around and turning things upside down, and it's always the accident. It's always like that freak accident that happens, and then I'm like, oh wow, like I didn't even do that. Like it was an accident, and it just worked out beautifully. Okay. But it definitely, for me, it's more of an expressing, like an expressive thing, and it's tapping into like a feeling.
Ditto all of that. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing that I think that Jay is pointing out is that there's a sort of ideational phase, and then there's an execution phase, and those two things don't always work in concert. And yeah, my experience is the same, that often my best ideas will be impossible to execute and not end up working out, and then something fortuitous happens when you just start the making process. I mean, interestingly, I think this is actually true for any art form. I mean, I find this with writing too. I don't know if Oliver feels the same way, but I'm working on prose. The best work that I do is sort of almost a kind of automatism. Like it happens when you're not really paying attention. And in a way, you can't really attribute to yourself. I think that's what you were just saying, which is magical and kind of great. Is that your experience?
Yeah, it starts after you sit down, and I mean, I feel shitty. I never sketch or underline, like I don't take notes, because that makes it feel more like homework to me for something. Right. But there was something earlier, one of the earlier questions about the jacket coloring the reading experience. Mm. There was a time recently where I think it was this old paperback edition of Murphy,
right?
And it had a circle painted on it.
That's Watt.
Oh, it was Watt, right? And it was such a tiny part of that book,
right,
that was put onto the cover, and it made so much of this thing that made you reconsider what this symbol was, what it was supposed to kind of evoke, and that made me think a lot about, what you reveal as a designer and how that can ruin or, I don't know. I mean, it totally can change the way someone understands a book if you choose to pull something tiny out as an object, or
it must be terrifying for writers, don't you think, that we have
I don't think that
ability to sort of frame some insignificant detail of a narrative and be like, oh no, it's this thing.
Yeah.
That candy bar on the table. Pay attention to that.
Well, in your book, actually, Tom McCarty said that designers are the most critical readers. I'm not sure if you have agreed with him.
I don't know how many designers he knows, but maybe, I don't know.
Can I make you a question more about the theme, the topic?
Yeah.
Okay, if you read the book, if you don't like the book, does it have an effect on your work?
Who wants
Our
to jump
answers are
in?
going to be very
Well, for
different.
me, it's I have a job to do. So whether I like the book or don't like the book, it really doesn't. It for me, my job, the role that I'm taking as the designer is that I need to create something that's going to be striking and interesting and make this book something someone's going to pick up. So it really isn't about like what I think about the read. It's more about, you know, I have a job to do as a designer, and that's the role that I take on when I read a book.
I actually find that I prefer not to like the book. I think you can make it more about, that's okay. So you can sort of think about it and figure out what your ideas are and like kind of pull yourself away a little bit and really think critically and think about the packaging, the selling, like what does this need to be? How can I do my job? I have a really hard time if I like a book. I have a much harder time if I love a book. If I love a book, then it's all just like pressure and pain and like self-loathing, and you're so wrapped up in like wanting to do right by this thing, and then you're almost.
It's so
I get in my own
Mm-hmm.
way. Like I feel like I almost can no longer do my job, because the job is to package and sell. I know we don't like to think about this, but our job is to package and sell books. Yeah, so when I love a book, I find it really difficult. Like I do all of Helen Oyeyemi's books, and she's my favorite author, and that whole thing is driving me insane. I should be designing her book jacket right now. Jeff, I'm sorry.
I think that distance is critical of being able to look at something as objectively as possible, and that it becomes more difficult when you like something. My experience now is that not reading any of the book is the best way to design a cover. So that's just where I'm at. But
Twist.
So actually,
wait, hang on. I just want
go
Ollie
ahead,
to
go
dig down on that a little bit.
okay.
I will a little bit. So a person very close to me who's here tonight in the front row once said something about designing in the way that a consumer might be sort of interacting with the book, like getting into that frame of mind where you want to be mysterious, you want to pique interest in all these ways that, frankly, I think you couldn't do with the synopsis. And they're like the sort of bigger overall feelings and those kind of emotions that you want to capture. You know, I mean, clearly it's a matter of style for the most part when you get a sense of the prose, but also I think just capturing an overall mood, you don't really need so much to understand what that is. And those quick and broad strokes sometimes can lead to things that are successful in a way that if you get too bogged down in the granular details, it becomes really difficult to do. I worked on a cover recently it was a New Directions cover, and for this tiny novel, and I loved the novel so much, and I went 7 rounds till I did something that they approved, and it's not difficult to get things approved there. It's a smaller press, and you can usually do things that are a little bit edgier, but I couldn't. It was really hard to do it, and for the most part, I don't know. Lately, it's all going to go to shit now, but lately I've had a lot of success not interacting with the text as much.
That's fascinating, because it seems like everybody is expressing that they need some sort of emotional remove from the material in order to be able to sort of see it properly.
Right, but see it properly. See it in a way that, in a necessary way, I think. Maybe.
Yeah, a little bit of critical distance.
Yeah.
It's sort of like doctors not working on patients that they're friendly with, or,
Or designing covers for friends that you're...
Oh, Jesus. Yep. Or for yourself, for your own novel.
So I have a question about what you were saying. In this case, you said that it only took 7 rounds. Yeah. Many people here in publishing know how many rounds it takes, but for the people that are not in the business, how difficult it takes, on average, obviously, to get a cover approved?
Jesus.
Well, it really depends.
Yeah, I don't know that there's an average.
Okay, so there is no average, but there is some story or something.
It's definitely the difficulty bears some relationship to the expectations in the house for the book.
Yeah, no question.
I wonder if we could come up with some sort of
Graph?
equation,
Yeah.
like authors' fame, how many books they've written, like over divided by, I don't know, less than.
How much they overpaid for the advance. Yeah, I mean, that's why I think maybe we would all agree that from just a pure design perspective, the most fun things to work on are those books that sort of slide under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones where you tend to have a lot more freedom as a designer. There's less expectation of some kind of financial windfall for the house. So,
Right.
your decisions aren't second guessed. And
But I will say, I'm sorry.
no, go for it.
But thinking about it, we have worked on books that were, first-time author in translation. Not a lot of, all of our books have a lot of expectation. Obviously, we hope for all of them to hit it big, but those have been really hard to pinpoint. And then we've had Jaya, Girl on the Train.
Oh God, Girl on the Train.
Girl on the Train.
I mean,
Say it.
But I don't remember that being a.
that was a long process.
Oh, sorry. That was a first round in my mind.
I remember design. Well, I did the obvious. I did the designs with the girl on the train, and then
The train on the
erased
girl,
those.
yeah, I
the
think
girl
I don't think
beside
I don't
the
think
train.
Jeff ever saw those, and then it was just and then it was finding that image, which was like, oh, they like this blurred image. Like, this is an image of nothing. Okay, like they like blur.
She's on the train.
It's a blurry blob. And then it was just about finding the type, the right type. Then it was like, do something with the type.
Sorry, I think I brought up the
Like-
wrong wrong scenario. I remember that being like, oh, you just did that first round.
That was
perfect.
that was a
That is,
long
but it's
process.
I felt like that was the perfect package for that book. But sorry.
But
sometimes,
and that was a
not
debut
Girl on the
and that
Train.
was a debut novel, and we did many rounds. I mean, and it was the arc that you guys did that was also really
An arc
fabulous.
for those early readers. Copy, right? Arc.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll send out early readers editions to people, for those of you who don't know. What I was trying to say is that sometimes you could have a high expectations and get, this is a bad example, approval on the first round, and then sometimes a small book can be difficult to pinpoint.
I think last point on this is there's a distinct difference between working on a cover as a freelancer and then working on a cover in-house, I think. And like if I'm sending you covers, you have to deal with all of the internal criticism and then sort of relay it back to the freelancer on the outside. So the rounds can differ a lot that way. Like it might be a case where an art director just wants to save the designer from any more headache and handles it, or if that freelancer is willing to go several more rounds. But I think that it's a much different experience working in-house when you're close to the editors, and you have relationships with them, as opposed to being on the outside where you're at a very safe distance and you can try things and you can not respond to emails if you don't want to, and it's sort of like everyone is at your mercy for the most part. But
I think the best case scenario is to be the designer that they call after all the rounds.
that's the best.
Oh yeah.
At
the end.
And
But-
then you just get it.
Do you give them a preview of everything that was actually killed?
No. Because I think then they're having the same problem we were all having. You need a sort of fresh eye, fresh approach.
So we're talking about thousands of covers. Among the four of you, thousands and thousands of covers and concepts. So how do you stay inspired? What do you do when you don't do what you do, basically, in order to replenish all this?
I'm just constantly looking at what's going on and what's around, and there's so much art and illustration, and just constantly keeping, I try to look at everything, and I just try to keep the work fresh as much as I can.
I'm in the process of hand printing a project for Riverhead right now, like self-imposed. So one of the things that I'm lucky enough to work in a place where we're sort of are allowed to play a little bit with come up with projects and sort of collaborate with other people within the company. So we've been just working on projects sort of outside of cover design that are creative and collaborative, sort of working with artists so we've done, so what we do is, one of the projects we work on is every season, we used to have catalogs. Now, every season, we don't have those anymore. We don't have printed catalogs, so we find a way to celebrate the season of books. So one time we had a mural made for us by Stephen Powers on a school, or we've made, Grace, who's not here tonight, she's sick, worked with an illustrator and made a flip book. So just like things that are not covers, but still sort of hands-on and creative, those have been really helpful for me. You guys write books, right?
Me? Stay fresh, stay inspired. I think, let's see, a couple things. One is, yes, try channels outside of the channels that you're comfortable in, and I think that can refer to media, but it also can refer to the fact that you should look outside, say, the visual channel, to music and prose, and there's just a million different interesting things in the world that one can think about that aren't book cover design. So that's part of it. You have to sort of step out of it to get some critical distance, and also the channels feed one another in an interesting, productive way. So I think the other thing is I have this thing that I do where, I mean, I think Oliver and I just did it 10 minutes ago, but I go to bookstores and I sort of look at all the covers, and I see the ways in which they're starting to cleave to the same principles and the ways in which things start to homogenize. And, you know, I think that's natural when we publish books. I think a lot of the principles that drive the way we package them and market them are retrospective. We sort of looked at what worked recently in the past, and then we sort of emulate those in a variety of ways. And the things that, like Helen said, the things that end up working sometimes are surprising and anomalous, and then those get copied. But I think a pretty good rule of thumb is to see what people aren't doing and do that thing. So for me,
people are not doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost oppositional principle. Like, you know, there's moments where everything is colorful and painted, and there are moments where everything is photographic and black and white. And, you know, there's still parts of that rectangle. I mean, all of us, you know, we have so many years of experience doing this, everybody up here, and we just look at rectangles all day long. And there's so many parts of a rectangle. Like, that space is interesting, you know? And yet, there's a very small amount of it is actually used on a cover, like type goes here, or it goes here or here. You know, things like that. Like, why aren't we getting closer to a margin other than the fact of the safety or whatever? But there are interesting things that you can do that just don't get done. And when you do those things, I think the interesting effect is that people go into a bookstore and that thing stands out because it's not camouflaged by everything else around it. It hasn't camouflaged itself, I should say, by trying to be that other thing. So for me, I think staying interested in book design and trying to find something fresh to say is really just that. It's about sort of seeing what's happening and then not doing it.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. There's a feeling that you get when you're working within the rectangle when something feels strange in the right way, and I think that is largely because it feels different from what you've seen in a bookstore, and I tend to trust that instinct when there's a space that feels off in the right way, or you're I don't know, it is oppositional, and there's a little bit of aggression in it too. Yeah. But that's I think within books, and then also like looking outside of the form for inspiration, or you know, looking at what's happening, I don't know, in editorial or whatever. It's sort of like a way to do something unexpected, I guess.
Fine art, obviously, if we're just talking
Right.
about the visual field, go to a museum because those people are not constrained by the same commercial constraints that we are, which can be horrifying, but you know, sometimes the results are really interesting and informative and can be salutary if moved over into the commercial space. I mean, you see a lot of interesting free kinds of thinking that happens in the fine arts world. So that's just another one.
Probably another question is connected to the process is how does sheer quantity affect your work? That's I mean, the real question is how many covers you work on in a year?
It's a lot. It's a lot of covers. And the good thing about working on so many covers is that, you know, it's like a muscle that you're like keep, you know, exercising. And you know, when the next project comes along, it's not like you're fresh out of ideas because you just finished something that might trigger another idea for a new book. So it's just it's a lot of work, but yeah.
Recycling.
Yeah,
Recycling.
recycle. I didn't want to say it, but
I think that's actually a really interesting point. Where, I would say in the last few years, I've been art directing a lot more than designing, and I find it much harder to start on new projects. So it is, I think, when you exercise the muscle and you're constantly working, it's a lot easier to start. Although I've always had a hard time starting. Every jacket is a fresh reminder of how I don't know how to design book jackets. I know it sounds, but it's what it feels like every time. I think I see a lot of designers nodding their heads.
But also, I think just working in volume, I mean, maybe I'm reading between the lines, but there's something great about not getting too attached to one project. I think that so much of creativity springs from a kind of ability to feel free, to let your mind roam without too much constraint. And when you're working on a lot of things at once, you don't get that sort of tunnel vision that getting bogged down in one thing gives you. And maybe this speaks to what Helen was saying also about just, you know, if you don't do it a lot, then there's just so much riding on that, you know, each time you're starting fresh and it's terrifying, it's like the blank page. But if you're juggling lots of things, and this is for media also, you know, if you're playing music and then you're writing something and then you're designing, it's just like none of it gets overwhelming. I think it's so important to maintain a sense of play when you're making anything, to not get self-serious or too emotionally invested, or even to feel like, you know, every problem has a unique solution. Just free yourself of that kind of onus, and it tends to produce those sort of wonderful accidents that Jaya was talking about, where, you know, if your mind is free and not...
But very prolific artists do the same. I mean, they can go into streaks of hundreds of drawings over dozens of paintings at a time.
I mean, I think there are different personality types in the arts world. I think there are those people that burrow down into one thing, you know, obsessively, and they're the kinds of people who are just incredibly prolific and, you know, go in all different kinds of directions. I often wish I was the kind of person that just had that one idée fixe, like who could use a cookie cutter and just, you know, there are writers like that, and there are philosophers like that, there are musicians like that. They sort of find their niche. Doesn't matter how big or small, but it becomes obsessive for them.
Actually, do you look? I mean, I'm talking about also Jay or Oliver. Well, and do you look for a style? Do you look for a niche, or you avoid it?
For when looking for people to work with, or
No, your own work at this point.
I try to avoid it as much as possible. I think there are designers that are very successful in having a niche, but I don't see myself that way. I mean, for me, it's always been, I've always aspired to come at each project in a new and fresh way and give that project what it needs.
I think it's a difficult thing to be a jacket designer and to work that way, because you know, you start to become known for that thing, and that can be kind of oppressive, and you know, you get pigeonholed pretty easily. But I can see how doing the thing over time and really kind of digging down and getting into it could be transcendent in a way. I just don't think that that's a luxury that cover designers have.
And maybe change over time as well.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I want to keep my work diverse. I know I tend to feel most comfortable with a paintbrush because it's just something I always start with when I start designing, I'll just start painting the title, and it might not even get used, but it's a nice way for me to just start something, and because I will procrastinate for the longest time, and so I feel like my work tends to have like a painterly quality, and I don't want all my work to have like a painterly quality, but I can't help it sometimes because that's where I feel most natural and at comfort.
I mean, we're designers, so our work is contingent in ways that other kinds of forms of creative activity aren't. Meaning that, there's a commercial reason that we're doing this. We're selling books. So that means that we have to be shapeshifters because the zeitgeist changes, and you have to some extent nod to whatever needs to be done for that particular book and its particular marketing needs. So that's sad, but it's true. I mean, the good thing is it makes us flexible as makers of things. Like, we all have to look at a lot of stuff and be able to imitate it. I'd say most good designers are good sort of magpies, like plucking things here and there and then sort of reconfiguring them. And, I know we all do it. I just, so in a way, it frees us of that onus of having to be, we're not making anything out of whole cloth most of the time. And that can be very liberating, I think. There's less pressure on us to sort of remake the language as well as the thing that we're making. We're just, we tend to co-opt like a vernacular of some kind. So, yeah.
I think the tension between the designer's ego and their desire to kind of make their own work, when really it's wrapping someone else's work and putting it into the world and trying to sell it, that tension is difficult to reconcile because you have to be selfish in a way to make work that you love. Right. But that gets in the way often, I think, for what the needs of the book are. I mean, sometimes they align and converge, but it's not. I think that's a thing that is tough to keep in mind, which is like you're doing a job and you're serving a very specific purpose, and it's hard to make work that feels personal in that context often.
Do you want to ask the question?
Yeah. I'm the one for stupid questions, but how many covers? I mean, which is the maximum of cover you design for a book?
Oh, you have to start because Peter has...
I mean, just to make the people knowing how it works.
Yeah, no. But Peter's working on his own novel cover and has maybe 100 printouts on the floor at the office right now. It's madness.
Yeah. All this sort of... So Oliver and I just went through this process with a friend of ours where we're designing this cover for him, and it's like arguments, and there's just like a lot of agita around it. And I was saying to Oliver this morning that like in designing my own cover, I was every single party in that particular psychodrama, but they're all in my head now. So I'm just fighting with myself constantly.
So actually, if you have to pick the first person you design a cover for, and this is, we can start with you being your own client.
Oh God, no! I'm the last person I want to design a cover for. I'm the worst.
Is it the publisher? Is it the consumer? Is it the reader? Is it yourself? Or is it the author, for example? If when you're designing a cover, who, if anyone, who you put in your, who is top of mind?
It's the mythic reader that every marketing department cites.
That guy.
That bastard.
But I don't know that I could. I mean, I think that's the job, is to, maybe it's because I'm in-house. You want to be true to the book. You want to do right by the author. You want to grab the right reader for that author. I didn't used to think this way when I was first designing, but now that I've been doing it for so long and the team that I work with, I just have such I work with people that are so... When you go to design school, I think often you think of your client, and in our case, the client is, I guess, the publisher, the editor, the marketing people, the publicity. I think you think of your client as somehow at SV, I mean, design school, it's often like as a designer, you're taught that you're smart and you know, and they don't. And you need to tell them and guide them and explain to them what they need. And I just find that to be really, maybe sometimes it's that way, but it just hasn't been how it's turned out for me. So you get out of design school and you're first working, and you just think like, oh, so they don't get it, and this is the right cover, and but now I just find listening and like your client actually knows a lot. I mean, and maybe this is obvious or stupid to say. Your client knows more about the thing that you're designing than you, so you just need to listen, and you just need to listen correctly. And so for me, it's this balance between figuring out what all of the parties need and how that can be one thing. So it's just a lot of listening, and then like, it's sort of what we were talking about before when you're reading the book and you're looking for that feeling. I sort of have to read the book, feel that feeling, and then combine it with the other feelings. But that helps guide me to the right, to the right path for the final cover, because I think when it's just you or you think you know, sometimes I think that can derail you. Or if it's all about you and your ego, like you were saying, Oliver, where I agree with you that those things can be at odds, but I think it also brings the fact that you want to do the best work. So I've worked with people that want to do the best work they can for themselves, and I've worked with people that want to get the job done. And the best cover is going to come from the person that wants to do great work for themselves. And so I don't think yes, it could be at odds with what's needed sometimes,
Sure.
but I think that's when you're going to get the most interesting, innovative result, is when you can find a way to like marry those two. I think without it, it's just not gonna.
Yeah, I have a question about what you said about the notion of the right cover. How would you define that? Like, is it because that's something that I struggle with, because I
Sure.
think that often people say it's not right yet,
Yeah.
and so that means that they have a clear idea on what's right, but they don't ever have an idea.
No, there is no
And
idea.
it's a really
I
difficult
think,
question to answer.
I think it's just that. I think for me, because I am there listening, hearing what, working with a brilliant marketing person, a brilliant publicity person, a brilliant publisher, and like just our team is really inspiring. So I've come out of this place where I think I know better, and they're just not seeing eye to eye, whereas I feel the opposite now. They know, it's the trust, I mean, we sort of talked a little bit about collaboration. I mean, we collaborate between, right? So like the designer and the art director collaborate, or two designers can collaborate together. You guys collaborate all the time. I actually feel like I'm collaborating with my team in-house, so as well. And maybe that's the answer.
Yes, and. I'm wondering if there isn't a form of, I'm thinking of my marriage now. Like, I have this wonderful marriage. My wife and I have been together for 27 years. We love each other to death. We fight like cats and dogs. And I think we wouldn't have such a healthy marriage if that didn't happen. In fact, our parents, the generation that preceded us, they didn't really do that. They didn't really have their fights in our case. And so there's all this kind of simmering, and I wonder sometimes what happens when, I think that there can be something so healthy about opposition. And what's wonderful, and probably why you're as successful as you are, is you have this amazing team that you work with, and you all have that incredible trust. I have just found that I'm not always convinced that the publisher, editor, marketer knows the book better than I do. Sometimes I'm not convinced the author knows their own book better than I do. And I'm not being glib. I mean, again, having written my own now, I'm sure someone reading my book will know it better than I do, because it's just too here. You need, and I have many times found that the best results have come from the fiercest arguments, and I worry a little bit sometimes about the sort of paradigm of
Consensus.
Yeah, just a little bit. And I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult. What I'm saying is, I think there are many ways to get along and get that sort of great final result. And just in the same way there's many ways to have a healthy marriage. Our way is just to scream at each other. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's worth it to say, gosh, I read this book really well, and I think we're talking about different books here, or the target audience that you're thinking about here. Like, have you really thought it all the way through? Because perhaps X, Y, or Z, and that leads to sort of further, richer kinds of conversations. And I often think that, if it's a real collaboration, which it sounds like it is at Riverhead, then the designer and the publisher and the editor, everybody is horizontal there.
I mean, there's
just-
definitely arguments. Like, so
Right.
it's just about talking through it and
Right.
getting on the same page for what that book needs, I guess is what I meant. It's not like we're all just like, okay, yes, let's go.
Right.
Like, no,
Yeah,
absolutely.
at the end of the day, you have to make a decision as a group. So yeah.
Right. I think it's also, sometimes it's not so much about whether I know the book better versus do I know what's best for the book.
I wanted to leave 10 minutes for questions from the audience, and we're about at that time.
Oh, wait, I don't think, did Jaya answer that question yet?
Oh, it's fine. It's I have to pick and choose my battles with, like, as an art director. So it's when I work on freelance is when I like collaborating with the art director, and I'm fine with getting feedback and working with the publishers. But I don't always think that what sometimes my first rounds are approved and all's well, but if we have to go rounds and there has to be a certain amount of feedback and changes, sometimes they turn out for the better.
Right.
That's what I found in my experience.
Well, because I think it can make you push through.
Yeah.
10 minutes for questions. No more talking.
No, if they have no questions, we can continue. Anyone has a question for before? You may get lucky, you may continue. Oh, there's one question there.
How did you decide that you wanted to design books in particular?
The question was, how did you decide that you want to design books in particular?
I've always had a passion for books. I love reading, and I've always loved the covers that on the books. And I actually went to school for illustration, and I sucked at promoting myself as a freelance illustrator. And so I don't know, one day it just came to me like, well, maybe I should try designing book covers. And I was temping at some publishing houses. This is a long time ago. And I had a friend that was working at Penguin, and it just so happened that someone had just left. And without any, design experience, I got the job. And you just have to really love books. You have to love reading the books, and you also have to be okay with being rejected, like,
Over and over.
There was another question.
like constantly. And you can't fall in love with anything you do, because this is a commercial market, and we are, catering to clients and authors and all these people. So, you have to really love it. And so that's what.
Because it's hard.
Because it's really hard.
Yes, actually there was one.
Yes.
I'm going to repeat for everybody else. Are you designing for the print book, the e-book? Do you have these conversations?
Yes, we're designing one package for both the print book. I mean, the ebook, the print book is also, like, the print book exists in the same way the ebook exists. I think that a lot of books get discovered online, very, very small. So that's a definite thing that has affected the way we design. Whereas before you were working at 6x9, now you're working at 6x9, but also 1.5 inches by 2 inches, maybe. I think I tried to measure it once, but now I just zoom. So now I actually physically will zoom in and then zoom out while designing. And sometimes I'll design like from over here, just for fun for a while, just to change it up.
There was a question there. The question was about the aha moment and whether there are patterns leading to that aha moment.
You know, so it's like you're trying to remember the name of an actor or an actress, and you need to think about something else, and then eventually it comes to you. Is there any pattern to what you think about that's the other thing? It's really like you just have to. Often, I think it's like there's a periodicity of intensity where it happens. It's like you dig down into something until you can't go any further, and then you're stumped, and then you turn around, and it alights on your shoulder like a butterfly. You know what I mean? It's really about that. Like you have to do the labor. And then something happens when you're not paying attention. And I think the labor is important. It's not that you just do nothing
Yeah, you
and
couldn't
then...
have gotten there had you not done the labor.
The question is that in the back of your mind, while you're doing the labor, do you think it's going to come? It's going to come?
But it's a question, if you're talking about reading and having the aha moment, like you've discovered something in the text, or after you've left the text and you're working and you have the aha moment, I think that's very different.
Yeah, it's true. Those are totally different.
I think he meant while you're working.
While you're working on the design?
Because the text supplies the aha moment for you. I think if you're reading carefully, the author has planned a certain kind of architecture of revelation for you. Mm-hmm. And if you're paying attention, then those aha moments they're given. So yeah, I think Oliver's right. If you're just doing the work, then...
I think there's a lot of research. I mean, before I start a project, I try to collect as much like images, and I'll go on stock houses and collect anything that can remotely look like something that I could use, and just there's a lot of like my folders are generally filled up with just images and stock images, and then when I start working, I start piecing things that maybe wouldn't normally go together or do go perfectly together, or there's no real pattern to it. I mean, at least for me. And I generally don't want to work like in a formula of any kind and hope that something happens. But I mean, I usually hope something happens, but that's pretty much what I'm going on. But there's no real formula to it, at least for me. And so I don't know when that aha moment will happen, and if it ever does.
Do you think that there has to be some like dialectic between really working hard and then just kind of like chilling the hell out for a minute?
Sometimes it's just I'm working under such like tight deadlines that I think the tighter the deadline and the less time I have, it's the less I don't have to think too much. And I think the more I think, the harder it is to design. I don't know if that's like a terrible thing to say, but like, so for me, it's just really working, and don't think and don't analyze it too much.
Yeah,
Instinct.
I brought the distinction up because I've had experiences reading when I'm like, oh, I know what it is, and it never works, which is, I think you said something about that earlier. And so it's like trusting that feeling less, but obviously, when you're iterating and you're collecting all this stuff, all these wonderful things happen. And I don't think it's always a case where it's like you've discovered this thing, it happens by accident, and sometimes it's a visual aha moment, sometimes it's conceptual. It can really vary. But
I feel like I can never get there unless that struggle, spending the time, failing. If you try to cut that out and you think like, especially if you think after 15 years of doing the same thing, you could cut it out but I've not gotten there yet.
If there's one last question.
So on a cover design process where the author's been involved, is there any time that the author's been helpful?
I repeat for everybody else, but
Sounds like some baggage. I don't work.
Yeah.
I
I've
haven't
had experiences
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
authors have supplied like imagery and from that imagery, we were able to just somewhat figure it out. But I think sometimes authors do supply. I mean, it's when they ask you to change the color or make it a sans serif or like little things like that where you're just like, oh, really? Like that's gonna make the big difference. Okay. We'll do that.
Are you thinking of yourself as an author right now?
Oh, me?
Do you ask yourself to change the color?
No, I mean, interestingly, I almost exclusively work that way now with the author first before the house. Like, I don't do a lot of book design anymore unless the author is interested in working together, and it's a very different way of working, obviously. And the interesting thing is it's just as fucked up sometimes as, the other process. Sorry, excuse my language. But there are moments where if the author is enthusiastic enough and willing to let you do the thing that you're good at, then often that's when the good things happen. But they're people and they're really nervous and this is their baby and they've lived with it forever and the stakes are way, way higher for them. And so a lot of it is just like herding cats. I think it's like, just managing their stress levels.
Like editors.
Yeah, right. That's what editors do every day. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, the four of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.